Okay, hello, and thank you everybody for joining us for today's webinar. The webinar is actually about my most recent book that was published on July 27th of the past month, and it is The Sensible Guide to Program Management Professional PgMP Success. So here's a little bit about myself. My name is Dr. T. Wu. I'm the CEO of PMO Advisory. I am today also a college professor at multiple universities. I was previously, from a work experience perspective, head of global project services for one of the big four audit tax accounting firm. And even today, I still continue to help clients manage projects, programs, and portfolios. So PMO Advisory is both a training company and a consulting firm. Here you can see a little bit about my certification background, as well as my education. What's most important to remember about me is that I try to close the gap really from three different perspectives. As a working professional practitioner in the field, I have over 25 years of experience. As an academic, I do research. Most recently, I'm publishing a couple papers in portfolio management, project and program management. I also sit on various standard committee. I'm a US team lead, for example, in the ISO. And previously, I work on standards for PMI, including portfolio and risk. So what I'd like to think of myself is bringing these three different important perspectives to the practice of program management. Today, we actually have a very aggressive deck. This deck is almost 50 slides, so we will actually jump quite a bit. Otherwise, we will not fit in for the hour. But what I hope to cover is talk to you a little bit about the book. I'm very excited that, again, it's been recently published. Talk about really what is program management and why is it really important. For the sake of preparing for the PgMP exam, I assume all of you are attending because you have a desire to at least look into the PgMP certification. It is a very logical next step for those of you who are in project management, especially for those of you who have PMP. If you are interested in PgMP, the exam, as I'm sure you know, the 4th edition of the standard for program management is principle-based. So here, I would like to go over some of the key principles to remember as you tackle the exam. By the way, the irony is the standard itself actually doesn't highlight the principle, at least not directly. It's implicitly built in. So that's the first half of the presentation. And then we'll cover a little bit about what is PgMP, why should you consider, what are some of the qualifications as you prepare for the exam, what are some of the pitfalls and challenges. And then at the very end, I will do a little bit plug about my company, what do we have to offer. One of the things I want to mention is for all of you attending today's webinar, there's an opportunity to actually get the book for free. So I'll also mention that at the end. So let's go into the book. This book is really designed to help program management professionals, especially those who want to attain the PgMP on the first try. PMO Advisory has been offering PgMP courses for at least the past 6 years. We are one of the leaders in the field. We are one of the few companies, by the way, that offers boot camps in program management, portfolio management, risk management, project management, agile project management. So you can see we dabble quite a bit into these areas. In our overall record of success, and to be fair, it is self-reported, meaning people tell us, great, we passed, right? I guess if people fail who didn't tell us, we wouldn't know. But based on that data, PgMP first-time pass rate is about 99.5. As a matter of fact, we only have one person who ever didn't pass using our methodology. If you look at the books by this number, by the different numbers, the publication date, as I mentioned, is July. It has 10 sections, 23 illustrations, 314 pages. What's most important is that the book contains 420 sample questions. As a matter of fact, most of them, 340 of them, are in 2 full tests. Each full test is 170 questions. So there are approximately 80,000 words in this book. Why should you consider this book? And we'll dive a little bit into this, but it is based on, frankly, a time-tested strategy. Again, we've been doing this for 6 years, achieving very, very high rate of success, as you can see. Furthermore, for those of you who register for the book, and I'll show you later how to do that, we also give you an online version of the same question, 420 question for free for 30 days. So it's not just a plain old hard copy of the book, you also have a digital resource. It's written by me, and I am certified in PgMP, PMP, PfMP, RMP. And the reason I'm saying a special offer, which we'll show you right now, is if you do buy the book and sign on to any of our courses, and later I'll show you, but we offer course in e-learning format, which is a pre-recorded course, live virtual. And frankly, when the world is normal, we actually offer physical class right now. We have stopped doing that since the beginning of the pandemic. But if you buy any of those courses, we will give you $75. The book, by the way, is only $70, so you actually make a little money. The book is available most places, but Amazon, you can see the link, Barnes & Noble. By the way, if you do buy from the publisher site, they actually are giving a promotion of 20% off. But in your case, you're getting reimbursement from us, especially if you decide to go course. I don't know if that materially matters. One favor I do ask is if you like the book, I would appreciate a review. Here's the table of content for the book. We go through the program management profession based on really the latest standard, 4th edition, fairly methodically. So here you can see we will talk about the introduction to program management, a little bit about the profession, the credential, also help you in the first chapter design a strategy for test taking. And I could tell you the strategy for test taking at the end of the day is pretty simple. You want to have a strategy, probably give yourself 120 days, give or take. For those of you who are a little bit more urgent, can you do it in 90 days? Yes. 60 days, maybe. Anything less than that, it does become a little bit difficult. PgMP is the hardest exam in the PMI world, at least the traditional world. The chapter 2, we covered the performance domains. And here is where, because PgMP is a principle-based standard, it is important to understand what underpins PgMP, or program management professional. So chances are when you go on an exam, as a principle base, it doesn't have the traditional PMP stuff. For those of you who may have PMP, you remember there is the input outputs, right? Or tools and techniques. And it's linked very tightly in the PMBOK 6. PMBOK 7, by the way, does go away from that quite a bit. As a principle-based standard, program management standard really doesn't have inputs, outputs, tools, and techniques, not at least explicitly interlocked in that same fashion. On the positive side, it does make a little bit easy on memorization because you don't have to remember those hard links. On the flip side, though, it actually does make the exam harder because now you're really looking at a wide variety of application. So in chapter 2, in addition to performance domain, we also cover the principles, which, by the way, we'll cover here as well, because I think it's so important to remember. Even if you have no interest in buying my book, which is completely fine, take away those advice because it will help you prepare for the exam. The next 5 chapters, or 6 chapters, really 5 chapters, goes through the various domain areas or performance domain, the strategic alignment, the benefit management, stakeholder engagement, governance, life cycle. And then we, chapter 9, talk about the program management skill at a fairly good level of detail. So you know and understand what does it take to be a good program manager. And in chapter 10, as I mentioned, the book contains a lot of sample questions. Here, there are 2 full tests. Each test is 170 questions. And by the way, if it's a real test, you have 4 hours to complete. So what makes this book special? Here's sort of my pitch, right? One's the content. We have been doing this for a very long time. I am a PgMP certified. We have a great track record behind us. So I think that speaks for itself. We also give you the online simulator for those who register for 30 days for free. We also provide you with exam aid. Actually, I'll show you the exam aid here. So sort of if you want to take a screen capture, you somewhat have it. We also started a support group in LinkedIn. And to be honest, we just started it. So it's not a lot of members, but we hope you to be sort of the early birds in there. And for those of you attending this webinar, by the way, also buying the book, give you registration. We also give you discount to our other PgMP products. Our actual exam simulator that we have built has over 1,800 questions, of which 420, for example, are in the book. Okay. And this is just an example of the job aid that we give out. And you could receive this if you register. We'll send you a link. You could download it and print it out. It's a little bit clearer than if you take a screen print, but of course, naturally, you could do so as well. Key notes about program management exam. As I mentioned earlier, it is the hardest exam in the PMI world. And it's done for a variety of reasons. I think partly because at one point before PfMP, PgMP is seen as the highest certification in the PMI world. So they want to make it into a gold standard. But more importantly, as I'm sure all of you who have experience in managing program, you know that the definition of program isn't actually quite exact. So that actually is reflected in the exam as well. In order to prepare for the PgMP, you actually have to know quite a bit about project management. For example, the standard, the fifth domain talks about the program lifecycle. Well, in some ways, there's nothing new there. Those lifecycle actually come from more the PMBOK. So immediately, by stating that, you could see that if you want to successfully pass program management, not only do you need to know program management, you actually have to know enough of project management. On the upper end of the program management, when we're talking about benefit management, strategic alignment, you're actually hitting against portfolio management. So as a part of studying for the program management exam, it's actually need to understand a little bit of the portfolio as well. Now, since if you think about it, program management is somewhat sandwiched between project on one end, portfolio on the other hand, the lines aren't exactly crystal clear. Because of this ambiguity, because program management itself has a very robust body of knowledge, and because you also somewhat leach from both the portfolio and the project side, traditionally it is viewed as the hardest exam, with a pass rate that, if I have to guess, hovers around a third. And just for as a point of comparison, PMP pass rate hovers around 66%, or about 2/3. Some people say 70%, others say 60%. Just hovers that number for PMP. But PgMP is really typically around 30–35%. So now, giving the highlight of the book, let's dive a little bit into the program management. Now, one thing I should mention is, as I mentioned, we do actually have quite a bit of content, and I'm going to skip through some of them because otherwise it would not be an hour. I have reserved about 5 minutes at the tail end for question. But if there are any urgent questions that you feel that I should answer, please use the chat and put in your question, and I'll do the best I can to manage that. So let's look at what is program management. Program management, in many ways, as I look at it, is a very natural evolution of project management. As company gets good, better at doing projects, they're able to tackle something larger. But programs are a collection of what I call highly related projects. So programs are more than just simply large projects. They are usually some combination of multiple projects. And by the way, in PMI's definition, program could also contain non-project activity, such as operation, because you want to build, let's say, that new capability or that new business function that you want to build. In my career, I have built, for example, new departments for program. I have implemented major systems such as SAP that requires not just the system side of the implementation, as I'm sure many of you are aware. There's huge business transformation, organization change. Each of them in their own right are major projects. And what makes it a program are these projects have to come together. And for organizations who are able to do that well, that is a strongest strategic differentiator that I could think of in the normal circumstances of company. Meaning that if an organization can do big and difficult things well versus a company, a competitor who couldn't, you could imagine just the long-term performance of those organizations. So studies, of course, have supported that view. example of a complex program, just look at the Boeing, this is an Airbus A380. It's just an assembly plant, right? That plane has over, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 vendors providing parts. And clearly, it is a very, very complex program. And by the way, when program goes wrong, really a lot of things go wrong. Using the plane as an example, one of the most recent fiascos is the Boeing 737 MAX development. As I'm sure people may remember, about 346 people were killed. Partly, if you look at really the root causes of what led to this sort of fiasco of a plane, is that in the design phase, in the development phase of the plane, a lot of things were not looked at from the program perspective. So for example, and this is just showing a very simple example, in the 737 MAX, they have two angles of attack sensors on most planes. And yet they only wire one of them to the system, the MCAS system, that controls, really take over the pilots from the pitching perspective. So yes, it may make sense from a financial perspective. It may make sense even from a project perspective, whoever is doing that. But from the program as a whole, looking at the safety, the quality consideration, I mean, why would you just save the money from really linking just one additional sensor and programming the software to do that? The cost, in the context of a plane is fairly minimal, but yet Boeing try to save money. So that's an example in which the project mentality may be fine because that may make sense, but from a holistic perspective, the strategic alignment with Boeing commercial, as I'm sure a lot of people read about, losing over $10 billion because of one plane fiasco. Clearly, they need to wear more of a program hat. So that's just an example. Incidentally, for those of you who's interested in to hear more about that, I recently did a webinar, actually a podcast, with a competitor, Velociteach. So if you type Velociteach Boeing 737 MAX and my name in Google engine, you could pull up actually a recent podcast that I did with them. So program management is really the centralized management of this collection of what I call highly related project. And when combined, the program delivers benefit beyond the individual project result. It is really a different, higher level lens to look at the entire endeavor, and it serves as a strategic differentiator. In my career, I have the pride of managing a couple of very large programs. I remember one of my first program, and this is back in the early 2000s. Was really my first program experience, was helping a publishing company getting ready for the Christmas season, and they aggressively wanted to have 10 projects done simultaneously in time for the Christmas sale, and they started really only 5 months earlier. So with 5 months, how do you get 10 projects executed? And by the way, they started out with 33 projects. We had to go through a series of prioritization to wiggle down to a reasonable number, which was 10. Later in my career, I have applied program management to SAP implementation, building new capabilities, a whole new department for organizations. And really, these are some very, very exciting projects. Each of them, and thankfully in my career, each of them are successful, is a badge of honor. Some of the people I work with to this very day, and some of them now almost 20 years ago, are still in contact as friends and colleagues. Program management can and should exist at all levels of the organization, depending on the endeavor. One of the questions people always ask is, how do you apply program management? I'm not going to go through this in whole detail, but this shows you a little bit of our consulting approach. PMO Advisory also does consulting, but generally we recommend a sort of a multiple phase approach. In this case, simplify a little bit to show 4 phases. One is you have to actually understand it is indeed a program versus project management. And I say this because program management inevitably requires project management at the project level. In other words, it needs both disciplines. So for organizations that decide to do program management is additional costs, right? All management layers are essentially overhead. And later in my career, I really was representing very large business organization playing the role of chief project officer. So I'm very cognizant of the costs that are associated with applying different methodologies and different approach. And program management has a cost. So here, as a program manager, you need to make sure that the cost is worthwhile. And by the way, often it is. If the project, for example, or the program is so important to your organization, failure is not an option, then you want to be that disciplined and provide the rigor. Sometimes the benefit you could see from economy of scale, size, easily outweigh the cost of providing that program management leadership. So in that initiation phase, the goal is to really understand what are the drivers and how do you establish those capabilities. In the second phase, you plan and replan. Program management gives organizations strategic agility because there are many, many ways to tackle a problem or to build capabilities. So a lot of it goes into the analysis. There are different makeup of projects. Remember, all these things, as I always like to jokingly say, these are human ideas and creation. It's artificial. We could conceive them in different ways. And this is where program management actually, I think, requires more creative management than analytical skills, especially when you're working on something that's new, for example, in the research and development arena. The next phase is once you look at all the options, agree on the different plan, ready to execute, you execute diligently. Program managers are not project managers. One of the most common mistakes on the PgMP exam is responding to questions as if you are a project manager. Remember, everything you deal with as a program manager, at least for the sake of the test, even if it's not in real life, must be at the program level. So strategic alignment, there could be issues, but program issue, not project issue, and that's true for risk. Leading governance committees, making sure you're making the tough decisions. And the program itself is pretty long. It usually, at least the smallest program I managed was actually my first program was about 5 months. But even that had multiple phases. We just finished phase 1 and phase 2 is about another 6 months. So most programs are definitely longer than the project. And what you can have, of course, in the program management, some projects are still in the beginning, in the inception. Other projects are in the middle of execution. Other projects are done. All of that actually falls into this phase 3 execute piece from a program management perspective. Okay. So that gives you an idea on how to implement. It's not easy, it's not super hard, but it does require building the groundwork and making sure you have the support of the executives. So let's look at some of the principles. As I mentioned, principles are important because these are fundamental truth to this discipline. They may not apply 100% of the time, and also not necessarily 100% of the principles all the time, but they apply to most programs most of the time. And this is a narrative that infiltrates the practice of really the program project management at every juncture. So what's ironic a little bit, of course, and I know this because I worked on the standard for portfolio management, the 4th edition for PMI. And at the time, I remember when the team was first assembled, they said, well, we asked a logical question. You want us to build a principle-based standard? That's great. Do you have any example? And the example PMI provided us was the program management standard. At the time, it was in the 3rd edition. 3rd edition of the program management was already a principle-based standard. And we looked at it and said, that's great. There's only one minor problem. It may be a principle-based standard, but there's no principles. So we do it on this back and forth. Eventually, the portfolio management standard, when we finished, we actually was the first standard that actually contains explicitly laying out what the principles are. So I have applied those set of skill sets and conversations and ideas to the 4th edition of the standard for program management, which is the current standard. And what I came up with are 9 important principles that I built into this book. These 9 principles are focused on strategic alignment, direct program performance and benefits, minimize surprise, manage responsibly, optimize approach, empower team, communicate effectively, manage up, and then look at the data, fact-based management. So politics, important. People's perception, important. But let's look at the data first and then figure out how do we spin things, right? So of these 9 principles, we actually go to a little bit in each here in this presentation, but I also recognize the fact that we probably don't have time to go through all of them. So I'll just jump on a couple that's important, but again, we'll make this webinar available, the recording available, and if you get to the principle you want to pause and take a look at it, you can. But the most important one, and the one that reason why I put this number 1 is being so big on the side versus everything else, taking a little bit small space, is because strategic alignment to me is one of the first most important principle. And it's really quite obvious. Programs are expensive. The largest program I manage, I shouldn't say I didn't manage the whole thing, I managed a good portion of it, was a $300 million implementation, right? I managed one of the 2 major tracks of that major program. And once I was done, I actually went to help with the rest of the program. This was my days managing large project in the Big 6 organization. And you constantly going to be under the gun to say, why we're doing this? Why does it cost so much? And let's face the fact, a large program almost never go exactly the way it's planned. So when things go wrong, there's always going to be a question, should we change course? Should we do something else? Why are we continuing this? I had, when I was at the Big 6, on one of the open meetings, one of the track I led, just to give you some flavor, the track I led was one of the 2 largest part of a SAP implementation. My regular meetings that I have, we have status meeting every month because it's big, has somewhere around 800 some invitees. And because they are all from different parts of the world, we actually have the same status meeting 3 times in 3 different time zones. So North, South America, Europe, Middle East, Africa, and then Asia, Pacific, Australia, and New Zealand. Right? In one of those meetings, one of the partners from, I think, the country of Japan, openly on the open line said, T, you should be fired for doing this program because I don't believe this program will work. It is a waste of company money when I'm, blah, blah, blah. Right? So this is the type of pressure that you could be under. And this is why strategic alignment is so important. And by the way, in that scenario, after trying to bring out the strategy while we're doing it, didn't quite work, the partner went on, I eventually had to say, please take it up with my boss, right? At the end of the day, I was a director, global director, there are people above me. But that gives you a sense of why the strategic alignment is so important. Because if an organization may be able to afford to do wrong projects, they probably can't really afford to do wrong programs. Others are somewhat straightforward. Principle 2, focus on performance and benefit. This is why PMI in the standard for the 4th edition, as well as in the 3rd edition, introduced the concept of benefit management. Obviously, principle 1 and 2 go hand in hand, right? Align with strategy, and by the way, these are benefits we're getting. One of the biggest role of having additional layer of really project management, program management, is the sense that we want things to go as expected as possible, managing expectation. From a program perspective, and by the way, this is true for project manager as well, any surprise is really not a good surprise. Even positive surprise, by the way, that benefit your program. From your sponsor perspective is, T, you should have known this early. We could have leveraged it. We could milk this a lot more, right? So any surprise is really a negative surprise. So principle number 3 is important. Principle number 4, it's about execution, right? Management, the entire art of management, the entire reason why we have project management, program management, portfolio management, is to help organization attain more value, so to get more done with less input. And this is true for program management as well. So program involves a huge amount of resources. This is where program managers, in some ways, are really like general managers. You need to put on the fiduciary hat and think about what can we do. One of the major difference between project and program, in my view, is because program has many projects in it, it actually gives you a lot more room for experimentation. The program I manage at the project level, some took on traditional waterfall, others took on agile, different kinds of agile. And it has to roll up into the overall program. So program sometimes is used as a container in some ways to allow multiple methodology for similar type project or related projects. So optimizing the real approach, the best approach. Also, another reason I say this is in very large programs, the program itself creates its own PMO, Program Management Office. This is a little different than Project Management Office, which really exists at the organization level. Program Management Office, or sometimes called PgMO, are designed for that program. So gives you the ability to really make difficult trade-off. People. At the end of the day, when you look at the program, just think about the program I mentioned. The people show up to my status meeting, at least the invitees, is around 800. Any average month when we run it, approximately 450 people shows up, about 150 give or take from every region, right? My project team, program team, isn't actually that big. Actually, I think it has less than 800 people, but it was still a couple hundred people. So at the end of the day, what program managers need to do is you have to trust in your people. There is no way in a program that the program manager can do it all. This is where I'm somewhat anti-hero worship, because usually you look at the project program manager, the leader, as a hero leading. That is not true. This applies better actually more as a servant management. You're trying to make sure the people have the right tools, the right processes with the obstacle removed so they could do their work, so they could be empowered to do better. Program managers simply cannot do it all. Number 7, communication. Now, by sheer number, and all of you here, I'm assuming are fairly experienced project program manager. You know that by the number of people complaining, the frequency of complaint, communication would have ranked probably number 1 as a problem for a project program manager. And this problem, by the way, magnifies in a program. Many of you probably still remember the old communication channel formula, right? N times N minus 1 divided by 2. For program, I mean, just look at my stakeholder. I can't do the math in my head, but with 800 stakeholders that show up to my status meeting, you could just imagine the channels. Especially if you have people open channel calling for my head, that doesn't work particularly well. So program manager had to get ahead of that game, have to try to lay out things as clear as possible. Even that is not going to be perfect. There is never a perfect program. I'll give you an example. One of the programs I managed later in my career is actually at the university where I teach, Montclair State University. I was the program manager for the campus-wide network refresh. What it is that we basically took our campus-wide computing network to the next generation, implemented a lot of Cisco, both software and hardware, and had to replace thousands of, let's say, access points and things like that. And when the project is done, it impacted, by the way, everybody in the university, which is about 25,000 people. It took over a year to do that. So when the project or the program was done, I sent out a survey. One of the questions was, how well did we communicate? Did we communicate too much, too little, or just right? And that, by the way, that is exactly one of the questions. And I still laugh at the answer. The answer came back. A third said we communicated too little, wish that they knew more about it. A third complained that we communicate too much because we're bothering them. And another third said we communicated just right. So I happily took the working average and said, okay, we communicated just right. But using this example just to show you the difficulty. Generally, I would say lean on the side of communicate too much than too little, even though, of course, you don't want to go overboard. Number 8, manage up. Programs, as I mentioned, is really aligned with the strategy. For successful program manager, this is where you need to really start thinking about the next level management. What does your steering committee think? What is your sponsor? And if you have multiple layer sponsor, chances are on program, you have direct sponsor or program sponsor. Sometimes you have executive sponsor. And by the way, sometimes you even have executive, senior executive sponsor, right? Multiple levels. You want to start thinking about what they think. What are their needs? What are their concerns? What keep them up at night? What do they look for? Because by doing so, not only do you become a better program manager, of course, is you set yourself up for the next level of management for yourself. Number 9, and this is somewhat obvious, but always to stay. In large projects and programs, there is no room for falsehood. Program managers, like any other really executives, can sometimes be in a very political, sticky situation. So you may have to play politics. I get that. But this doesn't mean that you look at the data in a skewed way. You look at the data as factually as possible. Right? If you think about it right now, as we speak in Afghanistan, we have a mess, partly because I don't think our leaders have looked at the facts the way they ought to. And the conclusion that come out of it, of course, is wrong, leading to a huge mess. So my suggestion for everybody, and by the way, that's true even when you think about the exam question, because it is data-driven, fact-driven. And yes, your decision based on the fact may still take politics into consideration, but the core of those data should be real. Okay, so I think took maybe a little bit longer, so I have to go through the rest a little bit faster. One of the questions I often get from people is program management right for me? So here, to give you a sense, we already a little bit talk about what is program management, so I'll skip that. But I do see PgMP as the top of the technical track of the project management career. So if you like the technical side, the analysis, the hard skills, such as managing large schedules, etc., PgMP or program management is really the top level in what we currently define as the career path. And incidentally, if you do like to play politics, if you do like to work with organization, and you aspire to grow organizationally away from the technical track, but more on the business track, PfMP, some future day I'll do another webinar that may interest you more, because that is more of the business side of project. It's ideally for those people who want to be super doers. For people who really have PgMP, like to manage program, you like to get your hands wet. You like to play and manage large projects. It's like being the captain of your own endeavor, right? You are a leader. Programs can be exciting because you really build new capabilities that the company never had before. You know, I still remember one of the happiest things in my first program. We launched the program literally within an hour of the deadline. The series of tools, website that we built went live. I always joke that we delivered 10 projects plus a baby because our webmaster was pregnant at the time. And after we launched at approximately midnight, she went home and delivered a baby early in the morning. So we got even a bonus out of that. It definitely positioned you to become indispensable in your organization if you could do do programs well and be on that top of that technical track. Qualification-wise, I think most of you probably could see it on the PMI site, but assuming you have a 4-year degree, you need both project experience and program experience. By the way, this is important. When you fill out the application, do not miss out on the project experience. The 4 years, 48 months is real. I had experience of actually somebody who worked closely with me in my days at Big Six, sort of my protege, actually couldn't get through the PgMP certification application. And I was surprised because obviously I knew her very well. And eventually we got upset after a couple of rejections from PMI. I called up PMI and I have some friends there asked, can you take a look at this? Why doesn't she qualify? She clearly have a lot of program experience. The answer actually came back, it surprised us, said, well, yes, the person does, but she actually didn't demonstrate she had 48 months of project experience, project management experience. So that's why I realized they really do look at that project experience. There currently, I don't know exactly how many PgMP in the world because since the pandemic, PMI is not being publishing this data as frequently as they used to. So this data is a bit stale from April of this year. So this is August now. But at that time, there are about 3,185 PgMP. So if I have to guess, we're probably still under 3,500, which means you're getting into this profession at the ground level. And this is a good diagram, by the way, it shows you other certification as well. And from PMO advisory perspective, we train practically every one of these certification except the scheduling professional, mainly because just there's no market for it. The application process is 2 steps. There's the initial application, and once you fulfill that, you have to take the exam. Once they accept your application, you have 1 year to actually complete the exam. If you don't finish it in that year or fail more than 3 times, you have to wait for a year and try again. The application process, by the way, is harder than it seems. A lot of people get rejected in the initial submission. They call it the completeness review. This is often because people in program management often write about their project experience. So when you fill out the application, definitely make sure you focus on your program experience. Also justify a little bit why it's a program, not just a large project. I have a separate blog article. If you go to our PMO website, you can find a separate blog article about writing the application. And then the second step is the panel review. This is where PMI sent to a team of experts who are program experts, volunteers, and then they usually help review the 5 essays that you have to write for the application. So it's a pretty elaborate process. And we actually get, I jokingly said, about 1/3 of our business from people who fail the application. So you could see the prevalence of that happening. Some challenges, again, very quickly, because we won't have time to go through them in detail. But what are some of the application process? Well, some people's title are not program managers. Program manager itself is not as a common title as project management, but that doesn't mean you don't have the experience. If your title doesn't contain the word program management or program director or something program related, just be prepared to do a lot more justification and description of why you believe you qualify for it. Some of the second pitfall is there could be significant mismatch between your experience and the PMI mindset. This is what I always recommend people who writes the completing the application, read the standard. The current standard is the 4th edition. So read the 4th edition before you writing. And the reason is very simple. Program itself is actually a what I say, rigorously defined word or concept in the industry. If you talk to 3 people from 3 different companies, especially in 3 different industries about program, you probably walk away with 6 different definitions. So what you want to do is make sure you're able to map your experience into PMI's language, and then as much as possible, use the PMI language in your application, because otherwise, from when you submit, the reviewer, who's generally the first reviewer is a PMI employee, they're not necessarily experts in everything about program management. If they read words and concepts, they have no idea what they mean. Guess what happened to your application? Likely to be rejected. Finally, the third part of it is there's 5 essays. PMI actually removed the limitation, I believe, most recently around 500 words. But you should still try to, 500 words is a good limit. There's no reason to write 5,000 words, right? You're not writing a book. Having said that, most people tend to write little. So my general recommendation is make sure you write at least 300 words. So that's enough, robust enough to describe whatever you're trying to answer in those 5 essay questions. Also, make sure you hire, if English is not your first language, a good editor. We do help, by the way, clients with application writing, review, but not application writing. So every time when people come to us for help with application, I always say we reserve the right to actually reject that. And if you buy as a part of package, we'll refund and prorate that piece. The reason being is it's too expensive for us to help you wordsmith everything, right? So make sure you hire somebody that can read and write English natively, at least fluently. We had a situation some years ago in which we had a program management customer sent us a perfectly good set of essays. The guy was fluent in English. We never thought it was an issue. And as we started reviewing the essay, we realized we were in trouble because even though we could make sense of the words, the sentences, and sometimes even the paragraph, it doesn't connect. It's like one paragraph is talking about one thing, the next jump off to something else. So when we inquire about it, we realize the person uses translation software. So as you can imagine, there's severe limitations. And that's why we came up with the policy. Yes, we help our customer with application review, but if we find it to be too hard to read, we will reject it and recommend you go hire an English editor. They're a lot cheaper than us to help you write that, and then come back to us. Be happy to review again. In terms of the examination pitfall, there are also multiple. Just like the part of the PMI, the application process, you need to really think. You don't have to drink their Kool-Aid. You need to talk about their performance domains, use the words around their processes. Even though PgMP is not as hardwired as the PMBOK 6, for example, there is still a process order. So understanding the order of things, understanding the performance domain, how PMI views program, that's important. So you still need to read the standard. Most questions are scenario-based. And because the standard itself is principle-based, it actually is involved in sort of the art of finding the best answer, not the right answer. And this is a huge difference than even the PMP exam. Now, PMP exam itself, I'm oversimplifying a little bit, is also about best answer, but chances are there's more black and white in terms of correct and wrong. In the PgMP, generally you have 4 choices, and one is the best answer that works essentially most of the time better than the other ones, right? But you have the next answer that's designed to confuse, and it's usually a correct answer, at least in a narrower setting. Even the third answer is often correct in a more narrower setting, and usually there's one wrong answer. So the second pitfall often on the exam is now people have to read everything and they distill it in their mind, looking at potentially 2 or 3 correct answers and say, which is actually better for the context that's given in the question. And that's not an easy thing to do, which leads to point number 3. You have 4 hours and 170 questions. If you do the quick math, you realize you have somewhere around 85 seconds per question. And by the way, I teach, I do a lot of reading. Most Americans, fluent English, could read maybe 200 words a minute in things we like, say our favorite fictional writer. For technical writing, it's typically half of that. So it's only around 100 words. So now if you look at it, if you think about multiple choice questions in which you have to read the question and the 4 choices, chances are that comes pretty close to 100 words. The speed of normal reading is already 60 seconds and you have only 85 seconds per question. That means you have somewhere around 20 seconds to analyze, to think through, to select. And you have to do it 170 times in that 4 hours. It gets really stressful. So time and stress management is one of the things that why we built the exam simulator so people could do it multiple times and they get used to it. So they're going to be able to be more efficient on the actual exam. There's a lot of suggestions for exam preparation. People may want to pause here to read it a little bit more thorough if you're listening to a webinar. But here I'm just going to cover a couple, right? One, as I mentioned before, the ideal time is really between 90 days and 120 days. Can you do it in 60? Yes. I have even known people who have done it in 30 days. So yes, you could do it, but you really have to put your entire mind into it. Generally, you don't want to go over 120 days is because, frankly, you lose momentum. So I think the upper end is around 120. The ideal is somewhere between 90, maybe 60, right? You should really develop a strategy and stick to it. One of the things that we try to provide is people who use our exam simulator, they could see that they're improving. We have our exam simulator in 2 modes for the bootcamp customers. And the flexible mode is just a short set of questions, around 50 you could play with, say, during lunchtime. But the actual exam mode is 170 questions. So you could see yourself getting better, and it will tell you where you need to develop a little bit more. So you can really track your progress. When you are ready to take the exam, make sure that you understand that getting a good night's sleep is probably the most important thing to do leading up to the exam. I have people used to complain to me the exam was so exhausting that they could tell, not that they actually fell asleep, but they were just mentally fatigued. So sleep well, eat well, prepare yourself, even do some exercise is good for you preparing for the exam. My exam experience, by the way, I failed the first time when I took PgMP exam. It's a little funny story. This is back in 2007, 2010, when I got I think 2010, when I got my PgMP. And I studied, I applied for it. I was at the time playing the role of the global head in the Big Six, and I actually forgot about it. So by the time I remember, I had a little bit less than 40 days to go. Before my year expires. So of course, put my head in the sand, literally now looking at the books and study for it. I thought I was pretty well prepared leading to 2 days prior to the test. And then somebody told me that PMI actually issued an updated standard. I was studying version 1 at the time, and now there's edition 2. Obviously, I failed the exam because I studied in the wrong edition. So I rebooked my test and had my second test 10 days later, which I passed. And what I learned about those experiences, one, definitely want to get good advice from people. So studying the right standard will help. But more importantly, getting yourself mentally strengthened, toughened for the PgMP exam. It is exhausting. I have a client who actually never used our methodology, so it didn't count against our 99.5% first-time pass rate. She took the exam not following our method, and she said, the exam defeated me, and decided not to pursue it anymore. That's how tiring the exam can be. So I just want people to be prepared. So with about 8 minutes left, and I promise to give everybody Q&A for 5 minutes, I'm just going to do a quick pitch about PMO Advisory. We offer PgMP boot camps really in 2 formats for live. The live virtual, which thankfully we've been doing even before the pandemic. So as you can see, it became our only mode of delivery, and traditional classroom. I should say that there's a third mode because we do go to sites. We have a number of clients in which we deliver program management training / PgMP preparation to their entire program management office. So that has happened as well. Our bootcamp comp standard was the following: real-time instruction by certified experts. I myself am one of them. Full access to the exam simulator, which we have over 1,800 questions. All digital content, workbook, job aids, etc. Complimentary application review. And then the post training support for up to 1 year. So we sell our course using the support package, and this is somewhat the third bullets here. Our base support is 30 days. Anybody, if you just buy our standard base package, it comes with 30 days. But you could upgrade it to 60, 180, and 365. And our support is extensive. We throw everything in, including the kitchen sink, into our support. For example, people could come back to future classes. People could ask us questions. People have access to the exam simulator. If you want to look at pre-recorded recording, you have that as well. So in our company situation, people often buy in either the higher end, the 365, or the lower end because they're ready to go take the test and they just want the last minute push. So that's some of our key features. Again, as I mentioned, we have a 99.5% first-time pass rate following our methodology. And by the way, our methodology is really simple. We, as I mentioned, have our own exam simulator, 2 modes, the exam mode and the flexible mode. So in the exam mode, which simulates the exam, make sure you get to 75% or higher 2 consecutive times within a 7-day period, and then go actually take the exam within the 7 days. Using that rule, we almost never had anybody fail. Like I said, we only have one person that we know of who followed the rule but didn't quite make it. We also have money back guarantee because our skin is in the game. It's the number for the money back guarantee is 85%. Again, historically, we only have to pay that once. So our success rate is quite unbelievable. So we talk about the money back guarantee. And by the way, if you have other PMI authorized training providers or training partners offering PgMP courses that you believe is better priced than we are, share with us. We will meet it. We have traditionally done so. And by the way, our prices are very competitive. It gets into a little bit of root of why I found PMO Advisory. It's actually a quasi nonprofit the way we're structured. So we don't have time for all that reason, but there are reasons why I'm a university professor and also the CEO of PMO Advisory. For those of you who have a little bit more limited budget, or you want the flexibility of self-study, we offer pre-recorded courses, exam simulators you could buy off the market. The only catch there is we don't give you the full 1,800 question. It's more limited to 800 question. So it's our way of course, trying to attract people to our bootcamp. For any of you who purchased the book, you have 30-day access to the same special version of the exam simulator in the book that we talked about. We also have a cheap PgMP LinkedIn group that we're getting started. We will likely to ask all of you to join for those of you who's interested. But there we may have some special Q&A and as well as special offers. In terms of the upcoming PgMP class, I also put portfolio here because a lot of people who's interested in program management actually could be interested in portfolio as well. You can see that we offer classes throughout the year. The next one is coming up in September, starting on September 8th, and then the one after that is November 3rd. We're currently working on the 2022 schedule. We have not published that yet. One thing about our live virtual bootcamp, which these dates tend to be, they are 12 hours total, organizing 3 different sessions that's typically 1 week apart, and each session is 4 hours. So just to be clear, so on September 8th, the class starts at 5 p.m. Eastern time and ends at 9 p.m. So that's about 4 hours. And then it repeats session 2 on 15th and then the 22nd. As I mentioned, the special that we're offering for the book, anybody who buys the book, we will give you $75. You have to complete a little form, sending a receipt so we know you're the original purchaser. Of course, by doing so, we also give you 30-day access to the online simulator. And special as a part of the webinar is if you use the discount code PgMP Success 15%, you actually could get 2 discounts, one 75% off for the book, and the second 15% off any of our future costs. By the way, the book does actually come in 2 multiple versions. There's an ebook, which costs less than, I think, $60, somewhere around $60. The paper version, Amazon sells it for $69.95. There's actually a hard copy version that sells for $175. That's why we put our upper limit in term refund at $75. So don't buy the hard copy. But if you want to have a hard copy and get $75 back, of course, that works as well. That's pretty much it. Because we spend quite a bit of time covering the program management, the detail, the definition, what it is, what it isn't, I think this qualifies also for a learning experience. And most of our webinars, by the way, if you're interested, earns different PDUs. So in this case, for those of you who are interested, claim the PDU, you could use this claim code to do so. Thank you very much. I realized now it is almost 2 o'clock, so I went right exactly against the hour. If you have any questions, now is a great time to ask. And remember, it is still being recorded. Shortly, I will stop the recording and I'll give people another chance to ask additional questions. But here's our contact information and the floor is open for questions. Okay. I think I either bored everybody to death or I delighted everybody to death. So I hope it's the former. I'm going to stop the recording